I saw this palette online. It was on sale. I was super excited to get it because it's a Winsor and Newton brand and it comes with all of these beautiful Winsor and Newton professional paint tubes, and they're in the colors that I prefer. This is my preferred, more limited set. And then when I got it in the mail and I'm looking at it, I was thinking, what? Wait, what is this? What is this middle section? If you remove the paint, it's just this big empty middle section. So do you keep the paint in, but they're not locked in, so they just kind of float around? And then the little divots for the paint are really small. So it's not supposed to hold paint long term, I think. So are you supposed to use it like as a travel palette and you only use a couple of colors as you need them, and so that's why you need to bring all of your colors? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So I decided, okay, let's put some paint into these little wells and see if it's meant to be it's just a weird palette, right? The paints are bomb. I still love the paints. And I actually have a plan with some of the paints to set up a real palette, like a really good palette. So stay to watch that. So I'm filling in the palette with these beautiful tube paint colors, and at this point I get to the end and I realize, wait, there's not even enough for the last three colors. So I needed to choose between raw sienna, burnt umber, and Payne's gray. Weird that it didn't have a spot for each one. But I chose burnt umber because raw sienna I feel like I can mix really easy, and Payne's gray I don't use very often. So I chose burnt umber, and I felt like I couldn't put too much paint in here or it would kind of overflow. So I set that up and I thought, okay, let's see. I need to wait for this to dry for at least overnight, 24 hours most likely. Make sure it's completely dry before I use it. Now, let me show you how to set up one of my favorite palettes, and it's a split primary palette. One of the reasons I got this set is it had all of my favorite split primary colors with a few tweaks. Um, I am really excited that I found this palette. One of my Patreon members showed me this Etsy shop that sells these beautiful ornate palettes, and she lets you set up the palette how you want. So you can buy different metal inserts. I chose 6 for my main paints and then 2 bigger wells for paint mixing. So let me talk with you about how I set up this palette. I do a set of cool colors and a set of warm colors, which is a split primary concept that has been around for a long time. I love it for watercolor. I use lemon yellow, and then this Winsor Newton set, actually, it says that they are CAD free. So this is a CAD free yellow, which I love CAD yellow. So if it's CAD free, even better. This is CAD red, but it's their CAD free red as well. So these are my warm colors down here at the bottom, the more warm yellow, a warm cherry red. Sometimes you just need a really bright cherry red. And then at the top, I'm actually using opera rose. I used to use opera rose a lot when I was a beginner artist, and I switched over to quin magenta. They don't have quin magenta in this set, but the opera rose is going to work perfectly for what I need it for color mixing. Then down at the bottom for the warm blue, I'm using ultramarine blue, which I also really, really love. You can check my channel. I wrote an apology letter to ultramarine blue because I am really sorry. I'm obsessed with this color lately. And then at the top is Winsor blue, which is their bright turquoise color. I typically use cerulean, but I think this is going to work even better for cyan as the yellow magenta cyan color theory for the top cool colors. Now we need to wait for them to dry overnight. Magic, they have dried. It's the next day, and you can tell that they have dried when you touch them. There's no give. They feel hard to the touch. Your fingernail, if you lightly push, does not go into the paint. That means they are ready to use. And even the ones here on this palette are perfectly dried. They probably would have been dried really quickly, but I prefer to use watercolor when it's dry because I tend to use too much, or it's kind of hard to use it and activate it with water if it's wet. So I prefer to let it dry. Now I'm going to swatch and test all of the colors that I've put in this weird palette. I will say I still don't understand the point of this palette setup, but if somebody can let me know in the comments what I'm missing or if this is just a weird design and that's why it was on sale, I'm obsessed with the colors. I would get this set just for the colors, and I felt like they were a really good price for this mini professional tube paints. So the palette really isn't that offensive to me because I know I can use it. I'm just not quite sure what for. I can see myself maybe using this when I paint in France with my retreat group, that I have all of the colors with me and I shouldn't run out and I can refill when I need to and maybe use specific colors for a class and kind of have them all there, whatever I need. So I'm swatching these colors and they're beautiful. When you move over to professional paints, you can feel it. You can just feel it. Now we're going to swatch my limited palette colors. Again, they're the same colors that I already swatched, but this is the limited version. I have an entire video about why I use a limited palette. I can link that below. But using a limited palette is so mind-opening. It's very refreshing. You can create any color with just these 6 colors. And I'm going to show you that actually by painting a little painting and proving that. It's kind of like my test. With a limited set of colors, I paint a red kind of barn with a blue sky, lots of trees, and a brown path. And I can do that with all 6 of these colors. So again, it is lemon yellow, cad yellow, but this is cad-free yellow, opera rose, which is the more pink magenta color, which you really need for color mixing, the cad-free red, which is that bright, deep cherry red that you also need for color mixing. This is Winsor blue, which leans towards the cyan color in the yellow, magenta, cyan color theory, and then ultramarine blue, which is a more classic blue, which we will definitely need for color mixing because it makes really warm, deeper hues. Okay, let me show you how the barn test works. The barn test is to test limited color palettes. You can definitely paint this barn and trees and sky with all of those colors that I have below from the more expanded palette that I purchased from Winsor and Newton. But if you want to push your color mixing and see if a group of colors works together, we're going to do the barn test. The barn test is where we paint a bright reddish orange barn and we paint trees around it, a blue sky, green, yellow grass, and a brown road. 2 interesting things to note. I do not have brown and I do not have green on my palette. So I need to be able to mix greens that are light and warm, but some that are cooler and darker, and then some that have more of the midtones. I also need to produce a variety of browns, red browns, tan browns, really dark browns for contrast and darker values. So I think the barn test is a great test for that. I started with a very basic reddish orange barn shape. We're not going to put the details in until later. And then I have placed some trees. Now my tree mixture is pretty obvious. Yellows, the lemon yellow, the cad yellow, the ultramarine blue, and the Winsor blue mixed together to get different varieties of green. The ultramarine blue is going to bring you the deeper, cooler hues and the darker values. If you want to make something even darker, say you have a really dark blue but it just doesn't feel dark enough, that's when you add magenta or red as a complementary color to really take the contrast deeper. That's why this 6 color palette really works, is because we're using complementary colors to create a lot of the deeper, earthier tones that we don't have in this palette. I like to make sure I know where my light source is coming from. In this situation, my light source is coming from the left side, the upper left. So I'm trying to create trees that have warmth and brightness over more on the left, and then really go into those shadows with more of the ultramarine and a little bit of the reds mixed in to give deeper values on the right side. This paint is moving so beautifully. I really love that I can get such deep values and high pigments without doing too much. I know a lot of painters will spray their watercolor to activate it, but I actually prefer not to, and I will tell you why. I think when you activate watercolor, it gets very pigmented, and when I'm using watercolor for the base layers, I need lighter values of color since we work light to dark with watercolor. So I would rather pick up less pigment and have it be more watery in the beginning, and then naturally over time it does become more activated and I'm able to pick up more pigment because I'm using more water on that paint. But that's my personal preference. If you do like to spray your watercolors and activate them first, be my guest. Just make sure that your base layers have a little bit more water in them so that you can add deeper, more pigmented colors later for your darker values. I really love to mix my own browns. And you can see earlier I mixed a reddish, more tan brown for the base of the road using cad yellow, red, and the ultramarine blue. And then I can just bump up the amount of ultramarine blue, add a little bit of the green mixture I've mixed at the top, and get an even darker value for more detail on the side of the road. As my trees at the top start to dry, I can add a little bit of magenta to my green mixture, and that gives me a beautiful dark shadow value. So you know you're starting to get it right when you have light, medium, and dark values within a subject and within your entire painting. So I feel like I'm going to leave my trees alone because I can see really clearly the light, medium, and dark values, and now I need to add some of those darker values to my foreground and finish off my road, kind of framing it here at the end. Also, it kind of got lost at the top, so I'll have to fix that in a minute. But right now, what we're going to do is create the shadow on the barn. The barn is not in full sun, and so we need to create the shadow, which also will help define the shape that I had in my mind from the beginning. So using the orangey red colors as a base, I actually added ultramarine blue since blue and orange are complementary, and it gave me this really deep, darker reddish brown color, which is a great color for the shadows on the side and the top of the barn. It was a little dark. I lifted some paint out while it was still wet, and it kind of gave this beautiful reflective quality onto the shadow, which I love, and I feel like it really helped the shadows look better. Then with that same color on my brush, I outlined a little window and a door, and we're going to leave that here until we add some more details later. Using the other end of my brush is one of my favorite tricks, especially for tiny little landscapes like this. And I love to use it when the paint is still wet, but not too wet. It almost scrapes some of it out, creating a beautiful highlight for tree branches or grass or anything like that. We are going to add some dark brown tree branches and trunks, but I just think that is such a beautiful start and a great way to bring some lightness into your painting by scratching some of it out. I added some ultramarine blue into this deep brown color that we had created because I wanted to give a distinction between the roof of the house and the body of the house, the side of the house. So just a little bit of that darker detail I think really helped to define some of those areas, and I used some of that paint on the window and the door as well. I really like how the path is looking down at the bottom, but up towards the house it's getting lost and it's a little too big. So I'm going to mix together some more greens, some deeper greens, to help kind of close that pathway off a little bit, make it a little bit tighter so we have the right perspective. We don't want it to be too wide as it's coming to the house. It needs to be pretty thin to look farther away. Picking up that deep brown color, we are using the very tip with light pressure of our size 4 round brush to create light branches, tree trunks, and we just want an idea of these things. We don't want to connect the lines, and we want them to be relatively thin. You can use a smaller, more detailed brush if you want to make sure that it's very thin, but we just need a quick swipe of this color so it looks like the tree trunks and the tree branches have leaves between them, that they are peeking out, and we're only seeing a little bit of this. If you create too many tree trunks or branches, even though it might look realistic if you're seeing it in person, it will look too chaotic. Leave as much of the tree leafy texture as you can. I really love to frame a painting, and I used this deeper brown color to help frame some of the grass at the bottom, and I think it looks really cool, like dirt and grass and road, and leaving the white space too helps your composition so much. It just gives it this nice airy quality to it and looks very loose, but also very detailed. You put a lot of detail in this little barn test painting. I'm using some of these deeper greens that I've used ultramarine and some magenta on to finish off the details of the greenery around the painting, and this little piece is finished. I think these 6 colors definitely passed the barn test. So what do you think of split primary palette? I think they're so fun, but all palettes are fun. Do whatever palette works for you. This palette, still great. I think I have some good ideas for how to use this, but it's not an everyday paint palette, that is for sure. If you use the paint over here, it just doesn't feel like you can keep as much in it as you might want, and the mixing tray is so far away from it. I need to figure it out. Again, if you have any tips or suggestions of how to use this properly, I would love that, because I don't want to not like this palette. I do want to use this palette. I'm very confused about this middle section just being for paint to sit in. I never keep my 2 paints in my palettes. But okay, I love it. I still love it. I love the paints, definitely. But I think the key is creating palettes that work for you. This ceramic palette works great for my tutorials, and you know I love a limited palette. This little palette is still limited, love it, but it's going to be more for my tiny paintings that I do on Patreon, and probably when I go out in my garden to paint. I love having small little palettes, and I love using limited colors because you can create every color with just those 6 colors. I also want to give a shout out to one of my favorite paint brands, Sparrow. They are a handmade paint company, and I have a split primary palette with them as well. I think you can tell I like split primary palettes. I think the hard thing about handmade paint companies is sometimes you can't get it, or it might not be affordable for everyone. I think this Sparrow paint is top tier. I have used it for all of my tiny paintings so far, and it's incredible. So if you can afford it and you can get your hands on it, 100% go for it. But if you need something quicker or maybe a little bit more affordable, this palette is also really great. But then when you get a palette like this, you do have to put it together, where the split primary Sparrow palette, you don't. I had to get all of these extra colors. You could seek out the exact colors, those exact 6 colors, and then you need to find a palette that you like. This palette, well, interesting, could be one that you've been looking for, or that smaller palette from Etsy, which I will link below, could also be one that you're looking for, but it's more putting it together. I will say though, I will take a split primary palette no matter how it comes. I obviously love split primary colors and color mixing, as you can tell by my watercolor palette selection. I think the main thing is to remember to have fun. Always remember to have fun. Pick colors that make you happy. Pick a palette that has room for all the colors. Pick palettes that you like mixing on. I prefer to mix on ceramic and metal because I feel like the colors mix better than mixing on plastic. So there are a lot of things to consider, but there are so many options out there for you if you are trying to figure out the best thing that's going to work for you. Right now, I am just topping off my watercolors before I let them completely dry again. Just as they settle, they kind of get lower and lower, and I'm just adding a little bit more. I'm obviously quite a messy, chaotic painter, so if you need more space, you might look for a palette that has more gaps between them and not combining the colors together as much as I do. Thank you so much for being here today while we talked about color palettes, color theory. We talked about limited color palettes and why I like them, and the barn test. We talked about so much today, all about paint, choosing the right thing for you, and how that's the most important, really, when it comes down to it in the end. Let me know if you have any questions below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye, guys.